If you have an Alaska salmon fishing trip planned in the near future and are wondering what you'll need to pack as far as salmon fishing gear, then hopefully this video will help, as I'll be going over in great detail much of the fishing gear that you might want to have along on such an adventure. Now, to quickly share my credentials before we get going here, I lived full-time on Kodiak Island, Alaska for close to a decade. I still go back regularly to visit family and friends, as well as hunt and fish, and I worked as a fishing, bear viewing, and wilderness adventure guide for many years. So I do have a pretty good idea about what I'll be sharing with you here. Now, this video is going to be much longer than the usual 3 minutes or so, but I wanted to cover all the bases, so I hope you don't mind. Okay, first of all, let's talk about proper clothing for summer salmon fishing in Alaska. Whether you're going to be on a river or in a boat out in the saltwater, it's always important to use the layer system of clothing. Now, of course, in Alaska, it's much cooler than it is down in the lower 48 during the summer months. In Alaska, during June, July, August, typically you're looking at temperatures, lows in the 50s, highs in the 70s, 80s, some places even in the low 90s, depending on where you're at. But the temperatures can vary quite a bit. So that being the case, again, you want to use a layer system of clothing. A common saying in Alaska in regard to clothing is cotton kills. Now right now I'm out in the garage messing around, so I'm obviously wearing, just a cotton t-shirt. But in places like Alaska and similar environments, it's not a good idea to wear cotton clothing when you're engaged in serious outdoor activities. Cotton is very absorbent. When you work up a sweat, it holds that moisture right next to your skin. And even though it doesn't get brutally cold up in Alaska during the summer months, you do get a lot of wind and a lot of rain. Like on Kodiak Island, for example, we get hurricane force winds on a pretty regular basis and sometimes torrential downpours for days on end. And so when you're wearing this cotton clothing, you really make yourself more susceptible to hypothermia. Don't forget that you can die of hypothermia in temperatures as warm as 60 degrees and even higher. And in Alaska and any place in the outdoors for that matter, hypothermia is a #1 killer. It's not bear attacks, it's not falling off cliffs. All those things can and do happen, but hypothermia is the most dangerous thing out in the woods. So be very aware of that. So again, when you're packing your clothing, keep that in mind. So first of all, as a base layer, I like to use these t-shirts that are made out of synthetic materials that wick the moisture away from your body. I use several of those I'll bring along on a trip. And sometimes I'll wear the bottom, sometimes I won't. If I'm in a pair of waders, submerged in the icy cold waters all day, fishing for salmon in rivers, then I will put on these bottom layers just to keep a little extra warmth. These are just a real lightweight material, pretty much the same stuff that these t-shirts are made out of, but just a real lightweight base layer, top and bottom, is a good choice for the first step of your layering system of clothing. For the middle layer, I like to use things such as these pants from 511. They're made out of, again, lightweight synthetic material. They're super tough. They got lots of pockets for all of your gear. They're very roomy, plenty of room for hiking and mountain climbing and whatever else you want to do while you're up there in Alaska. So these are a great choice, or similar products. As far as the top, sometimes I'll wear like a hoodie or a sweatshirt made from polyester or other synthetic blend materials. I've got like a lightweight polyester or synthetic blend windbreaker I always have along. Again, a lot of this depends on what the weather is, what the situation is, and the particular part of Alaska you're going to be in. You can sometimes wear a lot more than this, sometimes a lot less than this. Along with the windbreakers, I'll bring along a lightweight fleece jacket. My good luck jacket, always got to have that with me. So those are some good choices for a middle layer. And finally, we have the shell layer of clothing. Now you can get by with lesser expensive base and middle layers. Again, get the best that you can afford, but do not skimp on a shell layer. Again, up in Alaska, you can get ferocious winds for days on end, torrential downpours for days on end. If you don't have a really high quality shell layer, you're gonna get soaking wet. You're gonna really put yourself at risk for hypothermia, and you're gonna be miserable. Especially if you're out on a boat, out in the ocean, fishing out, in the open sea, in the open environment there. So I like to use rain gear and wind gear made for commercial fishermen, stuff that's very popular in Alaska, such as products from Helly Hansen, Grundens, Gauge, stuff like that. If you go to my website, I've got quite a few of these products available at my affiliate store, so check that out later. But just as an example, I've got a good, these are fairly lightweight, but super bomb-proof rain jacket. I don't wear rain pants, obviously, if you're going to be out in a set of waders fishing on a river, but if you're going to be out on a boat or hiking around or whatever else, you want to have a good set of bottoms. And again, you want stuff that's really tough. When you're walking through thick brush in Alaska, I've seen lesser pairs of rain gear literally just rip the shreds right off of people. So get some really good rugged stuff that you can have for your shell layer. I forgot to mention, along with your clothing, I like to have a lightweight pair of gloves because your hands can, again, really get cold when they get wet and the wind kicks in, especially out fishing off of a boat. So have some of those. Have yourself a good hat with a brim, you know, on those bright sunny days. You know, it can really get in your eyes and kind of mess up what you're trying to do there, so get yourself a nice hat. Next of all, let's talk about just some of the really basic, obvious stuff, but sometimes you forget about this. Never leave home without a good pocket knife. Of course, if you're going to be traveling on an airplane, make sure that you put your favorite knife on your check-on baggage, otherwise it'll be confiscated as you walk through. Of course, you want to take along a camera, whether you've got a really good phone that takes cameras, bring that, or like another camera or GoPro or something like that to record all of your memories. Don't forget your fishing license. A lot of people get to Alaska, forget to get their fishing license, or forget to take it with them when they're actually out fishing. And I guarantee you will get checked at some time for your license and all of your appropriate paperwork. So the Alaska Department of Fish and Game does not mess around with people. So just be well aware that you're being watched quite consistently by Fish and Game officials. So make sure you're legal, have all your stuff with you. Also, very importantly, you want a really good pair of polarized sunglasses. These are absolutely essential for fishing. You want to be able to cut through the glare in the water. A lot of salmon fishing is sight fishing. You know, you're watching those fish come in, you're really trying to kind of scout out and identify where they're at before you can kind of stalk in and start fishing for them. So it's really important to try to be able to see those fish as best you can. Sometimes you can't, but you want to give yourself the best possible chances. So get a good high quality pair, or at least, you know, the best you can afford, of polarized fishing glasses. Okay, the next thing on the list is terminal fishing gear. If you're going to be salmon fishing along the rivers, you're going to obviously be needing a good set of waders. I really prefer waders made by Simms. They're a little expensive, but they will last for years and years and years, perhaps even your entire lifetime if you take care of them and, you know, patch up some holes here and there. Don't have mine handy at the moment, but get yourself a good quality set of waders. Again, there's a lot of good stuff on the market. You know, do some reviews, talk to some people who have a lot of experience. I highly recommend Simms. ORVIS makes great stuff. Even a lot of stuff made by Cabela's is pretty good. If you're going on just a one-time trip, you don't need to spend a fortune. Get something, you know, decently priced, but again, as always, get the best that you can afford. So I prefer chest waders myself. You know, sometimes you walk through some really deep holes, and hip waders sometimes just don't quite cut it. So I recommend waders. I like to use get the stocking foot waders and then put on a pair of wading boots over top of those, which I don't have handy at the moment, but stocking foot chest waders and really good wading boots. Along with your waders, it's good to have a wading belt, which you can attach, you know, various tools to. Something that I like to use quite a bit, especially if I'm going to be doing a lot of catch and release fishing, is a handy dandy retractable fish unhooking device, or whatever you want to call it. It's basically just kind of a little loop end on the end of that, and when you bring your fish to the bank, don't even have to get them out of the water if you're going to catch and release, which is actually really good to do, especially for like king salmon and stuff like that. You can just kind of bring them to the edge, put that on there, take your hook out real easy, bam, he's back in the water, no harm done. So you can look into getting something like that. Also, of course, I've done tons of videos on bear safety and things to bring along for bear deterrent devices, but things like pepper spray or even a pistol, something like that, you can attach to a wading belt. So good to have a wading belt. Fillet knife, you can keep that wherever, but you're going to be getting into a lot of fish, so even if you're going to be taking your fish to a processor, still like to have a good sharp fillet knife with me. Fish club. If you're going to be keeping a lot of fish, you want to dispatch them as quickly as possible, then cut their gills and bleed them out. In fact, I'll do a future video on how to properly dispatch and bleed out your fish, which makes a huge difference in the overall quality of your catch when it comes time to eat them. So stay tuned for an upcoming video on that. I always have one of these if I'm going to be out on a boat. If I'm on a river, a lot of times I'll just grab a big rock or whatever else and then bop them on the head, cut the gills, and after you dispatch them ethically and quickly and cut the gills, you want to put them on a stringer to bleed them out and keep them cool. And I just kind of make my own stringers out of some of these little carabiners and big long pieces of nylon cord. But I like to make really long stringers because, you know, sometimes they got a way to go between where the riverbank is and the water. So I try to find either a bunch of big rocks that I can tie one end to and then put them in the water or whatever else. But good, sturdy, long stringer. Of course, Alaska is a land of the midnight sun, so you're not going to be walking around in the pitch dark too much unless you're fishing till like 2 or 3 in the morning where it gets a little dusky, but nonetheless, it's good to have a flashlight with you, so I prefer a high-quality headlamp. This one here is the Cabela's Alaska Guide series, which I've had for well over a decade now, still going strong. All right, now let's get down to what's in the bag for fishing on the rivers for salmon. I really like these fishing packs made by Fish Pond. There's a lot of similar ones on the market. This one you can use as either a chest pack or just as a fanny pack. And I used to wear the fishing vest, but I just got tired of all the pockets and all the stuff that would just kind of get in my way. I like to keep things as simple and as organized as possible. Just a couple of big pockets. You don't need tons and tons of gear when you're salmon fishing. So just enough pockets to keep things organized where they're really readily accessible, which is really why I like a chest pack so much, because everything's just right there. And also I kind of did a little modification here and put a GoPro mount. So if you want to film your adventures, you can attach a GoPro to your chest pack and film all the action. But anyhow, get yourself a good fishing pack. If you like fishing vests, get a fishing vest. But it's up to you, of course. But a good quality fishing pack to keep stuff organized. One of the first things you want to have attached to your fishing pack is a good set of retractable nippers for, you know, tying your line, you know, clipping off lures or flies or whatever else. You're going to want a pair of hemostats for, you know, removing hooks. If you don't have one of those fancy de-hooker devices, a hemostat works great. Also for doing things, if you want to catch and release, I recommend flattening the barb on your hooks. Always keep that readily accessible. As far as fishing line, a lot of it's going to depend on what style of fishing you're going to be doing, whether it's fly fishing or spin fishing or a combination of both. But for fly fishing, for example, you really don't need to buy those super expensive pre-made tapered leaders. Basically, you're only going to need 2 or 3 different types of line. For example, for pretty much all different species of salmon fishing, for fly fishing, I'll use a butt section of monofilament tied to my fly line, which will be just a maybe 3 to 4 foot section of like a 30-pound test. And then as a tippet section, again, a lot of this will depend on what species you're going to be fishing for, but for stuff like, you know, reds or silvers or chums, I'll use a 12 to 14 pound monofilament. I like to use fluorocarbon monofilament as a leader, so just a 30-pound butt section, 3 or 4 feet, 12 to 14 pound fluorocarbon monofilament for a tippet, you know, 3 or 4 feet, tie it together with a surgeon's knot or however you like to do it, and that's pretty much all you need for your line for fly fishing. Along with that, if you're going to be fishing for sockeyes and other applications, sometimes you need to get down a little bit lower if you have a lot of fast current or a deep hole. So you can use a sinking tip line on your fly line, or you can get these little sink tip attachments which you can attach as well. So again, just a recap: 30-pound test, 12 to 14-pound test, monofilament, a sinking tip line if you need it. And then for smaller species of salmon, for like pinks or small reds, or even for trout and Dolly Varden, stuff like that, I'll use a 8-pound fluorocarbon monofilament for a tippet for those fish. So I usually don't go down to the the real fine 6-pound test, 4-pound stuff. These Alaska fish are incredibly strong. They put up an incredible fight. Sometimes they go into some thick brush. Sometimes you catch bigger fish that are in the area that you weren't planning on. So I like to go a little bit stronger for these Alaska fish than you would on situations here in the lower 48. If you're going to be spin fishing, which again I'll get into rods and reels in just a second here, I highly recommend using a braided line. It's much more easy to manage, doesn't get tangled up nearly as bad. You can fit way more of it on your spool, which is extremely important. So use a good high quality braided line on your spinning reels. A few more things you might want to have with you. I always like to bring along, a handful of strike indicators. I don't really use these to watch the strike. I think of these more as a depth control device. Sometimes if you're floating an egg pattern or like a little jig or something like that, it's really important to get your presentation at the exact depth that the fish is. So using these strike indicators, these little floats, is a great way for certain presentations with certain types of fly patterns. So a handful of medium-sized strike indicators. It's always good to have a little bit of extra weight if you need to get your fly or your lure down into some deeper water. I really like these little strip tie lead things. Kind of looks like a matchbook set, but these little twisty tie leads are really great. Of course, I always keep just a little bottle of a bunch of different sized split shots in there. Let's see what else we got in here. All right, don't forget your flies. I like to keep all my flies just in one big fly box, and I'm not going to go into all the different types of flies for different species of fish. I'll make future videos about that. But again, I like to keep things really simple. I've got let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 basic patterns that I'll catch all 5 species of Alaska salmon on. If you watch my other videos, you know good and well about my famous deadly white jigs, so I bring along a ton of those. I tie those in about 2 or 3 different sizes to catch everything from kings all the way down to pinks. I've got usually a bunch of egg-sucking leeches, a few other patterns in here, so flies for all of your fly fishing adventures. It's always good to have a multi-tool, a good stainless steel multi-tool. Always plenty of things to fix along the way on your fishing trips. A couple other things. It's always good to have a tape measure. There are, in some areas, size restrictions on fish, so make sure you got a tape measure to measure your fish if need be. Always good to have a pen. With some of the fishing permits, you need to jot down, when you caught them, where you caught them, things like that. Good to have a pen handy. I always like to have a nail knot tool, some of these little tying tools to tie some different types of knots. Really makes it easy. Very important also to have a hook sharpener. After you catch 2 or 3 fish on your flies, it's amazing how dull your flies can get, and it's amazing how many fish you'll miss when you have a dull hook. So very important to have a good hook sharpener with you. And wait a minute. I like to have a lighter. I don't smoke, but I like to have a lighter just as an emergency fire source if I need to make a fire or get stuck somewhere, whatever else. It's always good to have a lighter. I always keep a small survival kit with me as well. Again, I've made other videos about that. I won't go into detail about that, but you want to have your basic survival needs met: shelter, water, fire, food, and you can have stuff in a very small little survival kit to take care of that. Again, I've got some past videos on that if you want to check that out. And that's about it, really. So again, you want to keep things as simple and straightforward as possible. Just a line you need. I like to use these smaller spools. I'll typically keep those in my wader pocket, keep them out of the way. Just, one big box, just the flies you need, and lots of them. Multi-tool, nippers, weights. That's pretty much it. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about fishing rods and fishing reels for salmon fishing in Alaska. We'll start off talking about fly rods and reels. Now, I've made some past videos about how to choose a good quality fly rod and fly reel, so I'm not going to repeat all of that. But one thing I will mention, people always ask, if I only have one fly rod to bring to Alaska to do it all, what should I bring? And the answer to that question is an 8-weight fly rod. 8-weight is really kind of the perfect size for Alaska salmon fishing. It's not too big for, even like big Dolly Varden and pinks, and it's not too small for going after kings and really big silvers and things like that. So an 8-weight is really a great choice. And again, there's lots of good high-quality fly rod manufacturers out there. 2 of my favorites, actually 3 of my favorites. I like G. Loomis, I like Sage, I like Temple Fork. ORVIS makes great stuff too, so those are 3 or 4 really good choices for you. These Temple Fork rods are really great. They're not super expensive. That's a good recommendation. But again, a good 8-weight fly rod. And as always, if you can get to your local fly shop, make sure it's one that feels good. Fly rods, people prefer different actions on different fly rods, so make sure it's one that, you can cast well, feels good in your hand. But a 8-weight fly rod will do it all. That's a great choice for Alaska salmon fishing. As far as reels, again, lots of great quality reels to choose from. I've got several different ones from Sage that I use that I really like. I've got ones made by Ross that I really like. You can get lower price ones made by like Redington, like this one here. It's a great reel, works great. Really, when it's all said and done, they all pretty much work the same. Some are a little bit smoother, some are a little bit tougher, but they all basically keep your line in place and have an adjustable drag. So get the best you can afford, and you're good to go. Along with that, of course, you're going to be along, riverbanks with a lot of, gravel and sharp rocks, and your equipment can get beat up really easy. So I like to always have just a little, cover for my reels when I'm going to and from locations or having them sitting around on the riverbank. And, I've seen a lot of people too, especially while guiding people, they get all excited and they just chuck their rod, into the sand gravel bar while they're fishing. And meanwhile, your fishing reel gets loaded with sand and grit and gravel, which can really bring things to a grinding halt. So always be mindful of not, jamming your reel into a bunch of sand and rocks and stuff like that. Always be careful with your gear. Don't step on your fly rods. I've had many fly rods broken over the years by people stepping on them, running to and from, landing fish. So be really mindful of your gear, especially if you're just bringing, one rod and one reel. So I always like to have a backup, or sometimes several. But if you got one rod, one reel, and 8-weight. Spinning rods. Again, if you're going to be spin fishing, whether on a river or fishing out on the ocean off of a boat, a lot of it, again, is personal preference. Some people just prefer spinning rods over bait casting reels and rods, and vice versa. For fishing along rivers, I typically do prefer, or along beaches too. You can catch a lot of great fish fishing off of beaches in Alaska. And for those settings, when you're in like wide open water, going for really big, aggressive, strong fish, I definitely recommend a high capacity spinning reel in those situations. With the spinning reel, of course, you can fit a lot of line on there. And as I mentioned earlier, I really highly recommend using a braid. This is like a 30-pound braid that I have on here. It looks like 10-pound monofilament as far as how thin it is. I got, I don't know how many 100, 200 yards of it on here, probably something like that. And these fish, again, they're big, they're strong, they can make unbelievable runs, especially out in the open water. And so you want to be able to handle that. I've seen some people with these giant, huge, surf casting rods and reels. You don't need anything quite like that. This is a, let's see, I'm not sure what model this is. This is a, Penn makes really good stuff. This is a Penn, not sure what model it is. As far as rods, spinning rods and bait casting rods, Shakespeare Ugly Stick is a tried and true proven rod up in Alaska. You see lots and lots of ugly sticks. They're moderately priced. They're very, very strong. I mean, they can take an unbelievable beating and keep on performing. For fishing big fish on big water, whether it be out in the ocean, off of a beach, or on a big water river, I recommend something like this Ugly Stick. I think this is a 8.5 footer, medium action. That's all you need. I've caught, 30, 35-pound king salmon on stuff like this, no trouble at all. So high capacity reel, braided line, for a big water, big fish, 8.5, 9-foot spinning rod, that's all you need. Don't need to go bigger than that. You can go lighter if you want more of a fight, but that's about as big as you need to go. For smaller rivers, smaller fish, I recommend a little bit smaller rod, of course. This is another Shakespeare Ugly Stick. This is a 7-foot, again, medium action. And just a great rod, really the perfect size. You can catch king, silvers on this, anything you need, really. I mean, these Shakespeare Ugly Sticks are fantastic. I've got, I think this is a Shakespeare reel on here too. Again, as much braided line as you can possibly fit. And if you want to use like a monofilament leader, you can attach that on there. But I really, really recommend, large capacity reels, braided line, and those kind of things for most applications. Again, if you like to use bait casters, if you're a bass fisherman from the lower 48 and want to use your trusty bait caster, those are fun too. But again, those are a lot more limited as far as the amount of line that you can put on your reel. If you catch a big salmon out in open water, he's going to spool that line off of there really fast. And if you're going to be out in a boat, going with a charter boat, he's going to have all the stuff you need, most likely. But I've seen guys, even myself, have caught 100-pound halibut on a Shakespeare rod and reel setup like this, with a little bit heavier line, of course, but these Shakespeare medium heavy action rods, you can catch everything on these. Let's see, also very importantly, if you are going to be doing some saltwater fishing, whether off of a beach or out in the ocean, it's really important at the end of the day to hose down your rods, your reels, anything metal with fresh water. The salt water will corrode and kind of mess up your gears on your fishing equipment really quick, even all the rest of your tackle. If you get it all covered in salt water within a day or two, it's going to be all rusty and nasty. Your reels aren't going to work right. And so make sure you flush everything with clean, fresh water right when you get back in from fishing. Even on your boots, I've seen a lot of these new wading boots with those little metal twisty tie, sort of lace attachments. Those little metal cables will also, start rusting and get real brittle and break quick with the salt water. So flush everything down, everything metal, all of your terminal gear with fresh water after getting back in from a day of fishing on the salt. I think that's it as far as terminal tackle. Of course, I forgot to mention bug spray. The bugs can get pretty bad in Alaska. Bring along some bug repellent. I recommend DEET, but if you're using DEET, do not get it on your terminal gear, especially stuff like fly line, stuff that's plastic, because it will melt your fly line. It'll melt plastic stuff. I use DEET like on my clothing, but I'll use non-DEET on like my hands and my skin and anything that I'm going to be touching terminal tackle with. A head net, a fine mesh mosquito head net is an absolute essential piece of gear. Mosquito repellent works great, but nothing beats a good old-fashioned head net to keep the bugs off. And just keep yourself clothed. Again, long sleeve shirts, a little lightweight windbreaker, something like that. Good quality clothing is really the best defense against bugs of all. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but I think that's about it. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to this channel and check out the 3 Minutes Outdoors website at 3minutesoutdoors.com.